Good morning and welcome. This is the Tuesday, February 15th meeting of the House Energy, Utilities, and Telecommunications Committee. Our next to last meeting before turnaround. So let's get started. We have minutes from January 25th and 27th, February 1st, 3rd, 8th, and 10th. Is there any corrections or additions to any of those minutes? Hands up on WebEx. None. Is there a motion to approve these minutes?
Mr. Chair, to approve.
Representative Keither makes a motion. Is there a second? Second from Representative Bourgeon. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Minutes are approved. Thank you. Also, a note on your agenda today about Stanley Adams' presentation with the replacement page and his testimony. We will allow that. We'll not strike any testimony that Mr. Adams may have given. We'll just include the new page. So today we have a treat. We have Utilities 101. We have several representatives who have, as we've gone along, asked for kind of a contextualizing, putting everything that we're learning kind of into a framework. And so today we're going to do that. I think it's going to be useful to everyone as we go forward into the second half of the session. So we'll start with a presentation from our erstwhile reviser, Nick Myers, going over some background on utilities and utilities regulation here in the state. So Nick, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, committee. Public utility regulation is certainly one of those areas that seem like the more you learn, the less you know. It seems like every time I dive into it, there's more questions that pop up in my mind and more things that I start questioning myself about. But hopefully I can kind of bring everything we've been hearing in the past few weeks back into context. You've been hearing from the electric industry, the natural gas industry. I will note that I made the executive decision not to put the telecommunications industry in this presentation. I can mention a few things on that, and we can get some further information on that as necessary. But utility regulation is cool. One reason it's cool for you, the legislature, is that it's ultimately a legislative function. It's legislative in nature. The courts have recognized that, and both federal legislation and state legislation have created the agencies and the oversight of the utility industry and have set up the regulatory regime that is used today. So in Kansas, 66104, KSA 66104 defines public utility. That's kind of our main definition of public utility. Now, excuse me, I've got some drafting issues with that statute because it defines a public utility very broadly. It's every corporation, company, individual, association, basically anybody under the sun that provides transmission of telephone messages or telegraph messages in or through any part of the state, or the conveyance of oil and gas through pipelines through any part of the state, and then also all companies and all persons for the production, transmission, delivery, or furnishing of heat, light, power, or water. So it's very broad. That's a very broad definition for a public utility in Kansas. Now the definition goes on to exclude certain individuals from public utility regulation, but as the public knows, for example, we'll talk about municipalities. Municipalities are excluded from the definition of public utility. Therefore, they're excluded from public utility regulation under the KCC's purview. But as the public knows, those municipalities are providing the water service, the electric service that those municipalities are providing. The public considers them a public utility, and this definition really kind of considers it that way as well. So in the early 1900s, the legislature, established what is now the primary state regulatory body for public utilities, officially codified it into law, and it's the Kansas Corporation Commission. And as you know, the commission consists of 3 commissioners that are appointed by the governor for 4-year terms, and no more than 2 of those commissioners can be from one political party. The legislature, through these statutes, has provided the KCC with full authority to regulate those public utilities that are doing business in Kansas in order to promote and ensure sufficient, efficient, and safe utility services. And as I mentioned, not every public utility operating in the state is subject to that complete KCC jurisdiction and oversight because state law exempts some of those entities. And you've been hearing from a few of those previously. So starting out, kind of the broad picture, a map of Kansas, think of Kansas. State law has created what is known as the Retail Electric Suppliers Act. And what this does is, I think we got a map of that, or I know Leslie provided a map of the certified territories of the electric cooperatives, and then we've got the certified territories of the IOUs. This law requires the KCC to divide the state into electric service territories, and those are exclusive. So those electric providers, those public utilities in those service territories have their own territory, and they have the exclusive right and responsibility to furnish that retail electric service within that territory. They can't cross over into other territories generally. And this act essentially, I would say, applies to every public utility. Municipalities aren't necessarily in there, but they're in there because they're pockets that are surrounded by other service territories. So municipalities kind of have their own little pockets within the RESA, or the Retail Electric Suppliers Act. For natural gas, there is not a specific statute that requires the division of the state into service territories, but the KCC provides certificates of convenience for natural gas public utilities to operate, and has set certified areas for certain natural gas public utilities. And if you see that map, you can pull it up on the KCC website. Those certified territories are a little different from the electric suppliers in that they don't cover the entire state, and there's a little bit of overlap in some of those certified territories. So when we talk about public utilities, you'll often hear the terms of either regulated or unregulated, deregulated, or jurisdictional and non-jurisdictional utilities. Jurisdictional utilities are subject to the jurisdiction and the regulatory oversight of the Kansas Corporation Commission. Non-jurisdictional utilities are not subject to that oversight. So when you hear those terms, think KCC, non-KCC. Regulation of public utilities for these jurisdictional entities and non-jurisdictional entities generally depends on the type of utility that is being regulated. So generally it's investor-owned utilities, or some for-profit utilities, municipal utilities, or cooperatives. So there's 3 types generally, and that type of utility that you are will subject you to different types of regulatory regime. On page 4 of my memo, you'll see a chart that kind of goes through the differences in regulation between these utilities. And this was pulled from the London Economics rate study, and I thought it was a decent chart to provide you with. And you can see the different business models, the governance, the type of regulation for each of these different types of utilities. And this is specific for electric utilities, but it's very similar for natural gas utilities as well. So the regulated utilities are the investor-owned utilities. So for electric, that's Evergy and Liberty Utilities. And then also, although it's not an investor-owned utility, Southern Pioneer Electric, which is owned by a cooperative. That's also a regulated utility, and we'll get into cooperatives here soon. So KCC jurisdiction extends to these utilities, these IOUs and Southern Pioneer. Generally, the bread and butter of this KCC regulation is rate making. So if KCC has regulatory authority over a jurisdictional utility, that utility must go to the KCC to receive approval before changing or modifying its rates or terms of service. And it's generally supervised by the KCC. So this will set you up. I think, Mr. Chairman, we're going to be having some presentations on rate making in a couple of weeks. So this will maybe be a good primer for that rate making presentation by the KCC, and if there are any others that are discussing that matter. So a rate case in front of the KCC centers on determining how much a utility must earn to continue to provide that efficient and sufficient service to its customers, while also providing a fair rate of return on investment. Another major step in rate making is then determining that amount to provide that, continue to provide that service, but then to also design those rates efficiently and equitably amongst the different customer classes to collect that amount from the utilities customers. So KCC, as I said, has a duty to ensure that utilities establish just and reasonable rates to maintain that reasonably efficient and sufficient service. So after the KCC gets a rate case opened up, they open a public docket that you can view all those materials unless they're closed for confidential matters. So the public docket is open, and you can follow that rate case through the very end. And the rate case would end with the KCC issuing an order to change utilities rates, and would make that final decision for those jurisdictional utilities. I wanted to mention something in state law. The Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board, CURB, is provided for in state law. And in these rate cases, you'll often get CURB and other entities intervening and advocating on behalf of certain interests. So CURB, as I said, established pursuant to state law, its purpose is to represent the residential and small commercial ratepayers in front of KCC proceedings. So that's a body that's representing the general public and those small businesses in front of those rate proceedings. As I said, the KCC can also allow other groups to intervene as well in those cases to make their positions heard. So for non-regulated utilities, this is outside KCC jurisdiction. KCC doesn't have much authority over these utilities. These are the municipalities and the electric cooperatives. Municipalities are governed by their local municipal board or the commission that they have established to oversee that public utility. And you know these as some of the largest ones: Kansas City BPU, Garden City Electric, Gardner, and McPherson BPU. State law also authorizes municipalities to enter into agreements with municipal energy agencies to provide some generation, transmission, and other related services to member cities. So those municipal areas, they may have some generation, but a lot of it is to distribute the energy to those consumers within the cities. But the state law authorizes these municipalities to enter into agreements with these municipal energy agencies to kind of provide those generation and transmission resources, those larger bulk generation and transmission resources to the member cities. And you've heard some testimony from the Kansas Municipal Energy Agency and the Kansas Power Pool, or maybe heard references to those. Those are examples of municipal energy agencies that are providing that generation and transmission services to member cities. Similar to municipalities, co-ops are generally not regulated by the KCC, and they're governed by a board of trustees, and they're governed by their membership. So the board of trustees is elected from the membership of the cooperative. State law allows, even though they're within the definition of a public utility, state law allows these cooperatives to exempt themselves from the KCC jurisdiction. So they can exempt themselves out of the regulatory regime of the KCC. And basically every single cooperative in Kansas has done that. So the cooperatives are generally organized as distribution cooperatives, again, kind of similar to munis. They might have some other generation assets. But then there's also some larger generation and transmission cooperatives that are providing more, some bulk power to those cooperatives. Some of the largest distribution cooperatives, so providing energy to the people, directly to the people and the businesses are in that area, are Midwest Energy, Wheatland Electric, and Prairie Land Electric. And then there are 3 generation and transmission cooperatives that are providing that bulk power to member cooperatives, and these are Sunflower Electric, Kansas Electric Power Cooperative, and Midwest Energy. So that's kind of an overview of regulatory structure for certain entities in Kansas with regard to KCC versus non-KCC control and authority. I'm going to mention a few more things. So in state law, transmission lines, the KCC has authority to cite certain transmission lines and provide citing authority for these transmission lines. So under state law, if a transmission line is more than 5 miles in length and 230 kilovolts or more of electricity is being transferred over that line, the KCC has to issue a permit to construct that transmission line. State law also recently, the legislature passed a specific provision related to construction of urban electric transmission lines, and this would apply in certain procedures for the construction of an electric transmission line, specifically in the city of Wichita. There's some procedural steps that must be taken, but the main thing there is that the KCC has some regulatory authority over transmission line siting that meets that criteria. Some other major players that you've heard about from the SPP presentation, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, has jurisdiction, regulatory jurisdiction over the transmission of electric energy in interstate commerce, and then also the sales of electricity at wholesale in interstate commerce. So the FERC is establishing tariffs and rates relating to those items. And this is where the Southwest Power Pool comes in, and you saw that presentation there. And the Southwest Power Pool is a regional transmission organization, an RTO, that was mandated by the FERC to manage the reliability, the wholesale markets, and the transmission services in the central region. So this SPP, as you heard from the presentation, is the kind of the independent air traffic controller, I think they've got on their website, of the electric power grid, and it continuously monitors the flow of electricity throughout its footprint. And it also helps with facilitating the sale and purchase of that wholesale electricity through its integrated marketplace. So that's a lay of the land of electric public utilities. And now briefly on natural gas public utilities, as I said, the regulatory structure for natural gas public utilities is very similar to the regulatory regime of electric public utilities. KCC has comprehensive authority for rate making and other statutory duties to oversee certain entities, and mainly the natural gas entities that it oversees are either the investor-owned utilities or for-profit corporations. There is a city, as you can see in my memo on page 8, there's a city of Eskridge that the KCC has regulatory authority over. So that's a municipality, and they must have, I'd have to go back and look, they must have, pursuant to law, relinquished their jurisdictional control to the KCC. But I'd have to check on that. So you can see the regulated natural gas utilities there. The non-regulated utilities, again, for natural gas are your municipal gas systems, and then also your electric cooperatives. And in these cases with the munis and the co-ops, the KCC retains statutory jurisdiction to kind of a backstop authority to oversee the rates in those areas. So there is a statutory procedure where a complaint could be filed for rates in a muni or a co-op to have the KCC look at those rates and make sure that those aren't illegal or unjust rates for the consumers. A couple more things. Gas gathering systems, kind of similar to munis, are exempted from the definition of a public utility, although the KCC does have some backstop authority there to make sure that any curtailments that are occurring with the gas gathering system operation are appropriate. And then again, federal jurisdiction, FERC has jurisdiction over interstate transmission of natural gas, and it also regulates the rates and services for natural gas pipeline transportation, storage facilities, and liquefied natural gas facilities. Also, the federal sector involves pipeline safety for natural gas utilities, and it's really a federal area at first. The Department of Transportation's Pipeline and Hazardous Safety Material Safety Administration, the PHMSA, regulates and enforces the pipeline safety regulations, but states are authorized to establish their own programs and participate in that natural gas or in the gas pipeline safety programs. And state law does this. It authorizes the KCC to collaborate with this federal program and to adopt necessary rules and regulations that conform with those federal pipeline safety standards. And the KCC has a role to play in pipeline safety within the state and for those intra-state pipelines. And Mr. Chairman, as I said, I did not touch on telecommunications or water. KCC also has a miscellaneous public utility under state law. They've got some jurisdiction over a few water utilities, but those are often not talked about. But I'd be happy to answer any questions or briefly cover either of those topics.
Thank you, Nick. Representative Keither has her hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say that I've been on this committee for 26 years, and this is an outstanding presentation, and I would advise anybody who is new to the committee to keep this close to your on hand, because it is good, basic, solid information. And Nick, thank you very much for doing this, and Mr. Chairman for setting this up. It's a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Bergquist.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nick, the mention you made of the KCC's some authority over gathering, does that include storage, underground storage, or?
That's a good question, and that's one of those questions where I said at the very first of the presentation, you start to learn about this area, and then you start to find more questions like that, and I'm not exactly sure. We maybe should ask the KCC, or I can do some further digging on that to see if they've got any federal grant or they've entered into any contract with the feds to have some jurisdiction over storage operations.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We have some natural gas folks coming up this morning, so if they can't answer the question, we'll have Nick dig in a little more on that. Representative Wahhabism has his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to find out, does the KCC actually regulate or have any oversight with respect to the propane industry per se?
I'm not sure on that, Representative. Not that I'm aware of, but I'll have to check. I can't definitively say one way or another right now, and somebody in the room might be able to answer that as well.
We'll get you an answer on that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just to follow up, is there a way that the presentation can be made? Is there like a written thing that can be made to the members as well, Mr. Chairman? His presentation, is there like, are you able to submit your presentation in writing by chance?
Representative Wahhabism, it is here in your folder. So if you check in, the folders are kept down in Representative Schreiber's office. So when you're around, trip down there, and Susan can give you your folder and get you a copy of this.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You bet. Other questions? Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your presentation. I agree with Representative Keither. It's very, very good and comprehensive. And as you mentioned there at the very end, it excludes any mention of like telecommunications. We've had presentations in this committee as we've done this series about, cell phones, landlines, cable, internet. You talked about KCC and CURB looking out for the ratepayers. So what about in those areas? Can you offer any comment there?
Yeah, that's the rate-making process with the telecom industry, I'm not as familiar with, and but I will say KCC has jurisdiction over the incumbent local exchange carriers. There's a lot of acronyms in telecom industry. So they've got jurisdiction over the incumbent local exchange carriers except for Southwestern Bell. So that's their jurisdictional area. They do not regulate wireless. They don't regulate the internet or broadband, and they don't regulate cable television. As for the parties that might intervene in cases like that, I'm not I'm not aware of anything established pursuant to state law to advocate on behalf of certain telecom users, local exchange users, but yeah, I'd have to dig in, or maybe somebody from the KCC or the telecom industry could help out with that a little bit.
Representative Turner, hang on to that question because we will have, when we come back from turnaround that first week in March, we will have the KCC here to talk about rate making generally. And that'll be a great question for their representative to cover on the telecom piece.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, I want to say that, real quick, if it's okay, I've had a memo on this 4 years ago that I pulled up from the depths of my computer files, and I looked at it and I just laughed at myself for even presenting that to the committee, and I thought it was so terrible. So I worked on updating that and creating this, but I would hope, and my intent is to continue to kind of update this memo and continue it, and hopefully drop some telecom information into there. And just as I have time, just to continue to help the committee out and provide a good document to kind of work from. So hopefully I can continue that effort as we move forward.
Thank you. Representative Delperdang, last question for Nick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple comments, and I'd like to put it on kind of a wish list. When you're bored and you're just searching the internet or what have you, I'd love to have a little background or comments made concerning telecom and cable overview regulations, specifically as they dig into, it's called IRUs, irrefutable rights of usage, and how they pertain to right-of-way access, because we've run into some issues in the past on that could really help us out moving forward. And then maybe getting into KDOT and how their roles in the right-of-way access, again, with the IRUs and so forth. And then we've had also hearings and stuff in the past on placement of 5G wireless infrastructure on existing poles. And if you get a chance, I'd love to have you just kind of do some sort of digging on that from a regulatory standpoint in the future.
Yeah, so that's 66/2019, the statute there with regard to citing wireless infrastructure. That's a big one, and that was passed fairly recently. And yeah, you're mentioning a lot of issues. I mean, that's the fun of this area: right-of-way issues, regulatory issues. I mean, siting issues, regulation versus non-regulation, light touch versus kind of heavy KCC touch. I mean, there's so many things that go into this area, and it's fun. But yeah, I'll look into those that telecom, and I'll work on updating the memo on that, and kind of provide a brief, especially on 66/2019. For wireless providers too.
On behalf of the committee, I want to say thank you, Nick, for the work you did on this and giving us some background. You know, I've said it throughout this session that this is a very complex area of the law, and when we have our committee leadership planning meetings every week, we talk about what topics do we still want to cover, and it really is everything from property and land use to right-of-way to siting to regulations. But I hope that everybody's beginning to understand how unique this area is in the legislature, where essentially over 100 years ago, you had this grant of basically monopolies, these certified territories that only one entity is going to provide service in. And that's a public policy decision that they made then to avoid having 50 different companies stringing lines along the road, and said we're going to let a company invest and receive the value of its investment back through rates, and that the legislature retains its authority, even though we've created this KCC to handle the very technical aspects of utilities governance. And there's a lot of tension that's inherent in that system. And it's like when people talk to us about politics and say, well, why are you always fighting with the executive branch or the courts? It's designed to have that tension in it. It's designed that you have a company that has a profit motive, but also has to recover the cost of its investment. It's designed to have tension between how high should rates be, how low should rates be, how much investment is necessary. And now we add the transforming landscape for energy across the country, and in fact, the globe, as we talk about what sources of generation will we use, for example, when it comes to electricity. And now we have technology changing with these things. You know, I can remember battles over the Kansas Universal Service Fee back when I started 10 years ago, that now, you know, it's not nearly, it's still there, and there's still battles to come, but it's not nearly what it was 10 years ago as everyone's transitioned to cell phones and people are turning off landlines. And so it is a fascinating area of law. There is a lot of good that can be done here for the people of the state, and a lot of good that is done by the companies that step up and serve folks around our state. But I hope you understand now that the reason we're doing it this way is because there's so many unintended consequences that can come from regulating in this area if we don't fully understand the things that we're regulating and the structures that we're dealing with. They're complex by design, and I consider it an honor to be working in this area with all of you and the talented people in our research and revisors offices and the folks who come here every day representing their clients, because it is a really, really fascinating area and a lot of potential to do good. So thank you, Nick. I am excited about our next presentation as well. This is kind of the long-awaited Utilities 101. So Nick kind of gave you the bare bones. Here's all the pretty pictures. And so I will invite Kimberly Swati, who has worked on this several years ago and then dusted it off for us, and come up and give us a little background. And then we'll have two other presenters today. And we've got about 57 minutes left. So with that, the time is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I just want to tee up what you have in your hands. My name is Kimberly Ginter-Swati, and in this capacity, I represent Kansas Municipal Utilities, so all the community-owned electric, natural gas, water, and wastewater utilities. Lots of acronyms, including Kansas Municipal Agency and Kansas Power Pool. So the Energy 101, just real quick, this whole document is intended, like Nick's, to be a living, breathing document, but something that you can just have with you handy dandy as a reference document about the electric industry, the natural gas industry. And we have some facts and figures in here from EIA, the International Energy Agency, that's going to give you a really good overview of what energy looks like in the state of Kansas, and not just related to the electric side or the natural gas side, but we've got information in here, for example, like what are the demographics of our state? And then it moves into the types of generation that's provided: coal, natural gas. We talk about some of our natural gas reserves in the state. We talk about some of our coal reserves in the state. There's some good data in here about our oil production and our available reserves in oil. So those are kind of the first slides, like 2 through 6, but I would really encourage you to spend a little time going through some of these charts. It actually gets so detailed that they track the number of gas filling stations that we have in the state of Kansas. So very incredible detail just for you to kind of familiarize yourself with the complexity of this industry. CURB testified recently before the Senate Committee, Utilities Committee, that they feel like it takes them several years to really train an attorney to really work effectively on behalf of the industry. That is how complex this industry is. And as the chairman alluded, when you kind of make changes on one side, you're making changes oftentimes unintended on the other side. And then there's just some really good overview information, historical information about kind of how we operated previously and taking us to where we are today. So we have Patrick Vogelsberg that's going to give you a presentation on the natural gas utilities, and Laura Lutz with Emergence that's going to talk to you about the electric utilities. So, and then we are all here in the room ready and able to answer any questions that you all may have. So, with that, thank you.
Patrick, you're up.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Kimberly, for batting lead off, setting this up. I am Patrick Vogelsberg, and I am the Manager of Government Affairs for Kansas Gas Service. And our presentation here is not going to be company specific to Kansas Gas or One Gas. It's going to try to be comprehensive to all the natural gas utilities, but with the caveat that I do represent an investor-owned utility, and it's a local distribution company. So we all, not only in this room, but certainly I rely on subject matter experts within my company on a weekly basis. And so if at any time you want to go narrower and deeper, I'd be happy to get those folks, bring some information before you. So with that, I'm going to start off on just the natural gas terminology slide. And this is just a simple overview of various terms within the natural gas industry, primarily focusing on volumetric standards and different things, but also goes into what's a town border station, LDC, local distribution company, and such. But where I want to start my presentation is with this graphic here, and keep going down. There you are, right there. All right, so this is a graphical representation of the wellhead to burner tip, or the value chain that natural gas takes from wellhead to the end use customer. And I also have a simplified version on the next slide. But as you all know, at the very, I guess, top left-hand corner there, you have the exploration and production area and the gathering systems. This is where the producers are located, and you all will recall that you heard from the Kansas Independent Oil and Gas Association, Mr. Ed Cross. You also have the Eastern Kansas Oil and Gas Association. Mr. Tom Powlis represents those folks. So if there's ever any questions around exploration and production, that's the area to inquire into. Then it moves into the midstream area. This is where the hydrocarbons are processed and separated, and marketable byproducts like propane and butane are sent off to market, and the natural gas, the methane, continues on downstream. This is where there's processing and treatment, but then also along those transmission systems or those pipelines, there's going to be compression that's building up pressure to make sure that that gas continues on downstream. You'll remember from an earlier presentation from One Oak, Mr. Gillespie, who's in the audience here, his company occupies that midstream space. So finally, you arrive down where we're at, the local distribution company. This is where we take custody of the gas and then distribute that to our customers, whether they're residential, commercial, or industrial. So the next segment here, when we go down to, yes, good. This is just a very simplified, a little bit more simplified version of the natural gas wellhead to burner tip. You see where the LDC will take custody at the city gate or border station. For these subsequent slides here, this is review. You've seen this. I was up here a couple weeks ago, provided this information. I wanted to include it here just as Kimberly had indicated. This is a document that maybe you could refer back to at your leisure. So at the city gates, as a review, we're taking custody of that gas. We're reducing pressure. We're adding mercaptan, which is the odorant, to that natural gas. And remember the analogy as far as once we're taking gas off of those interstate pipelines, the analogy to coming off a vehicle coming off an interstate highway. The pipeline diameter is getting narrower off that interstate, and the pressure's being reduced down to distribution levels similar to a car slowing down, getting off the interstate. And so by the time that gas is flowing into a business or a residential neighborhood, it's like you pulling up into your driveway. Hopefully you're no longer cruising at city street speeds or highway speeds. You're just creeping in to your driveway. Then I get into customer types. Yes. So again, to customer types, and this is, again, review, but I wanted to point out that the customer types, residential, commercial, industrial, and how they go about procuring natural gas and who procures that natural gas for them is important. But it's sometimes, I think, for folks that aren't in the industry, it may not always be relevant. Standing here today, I think it's going to be a beautiful day outside, but we can all remember about roughly 1 year ago, who procured natural gas for their customers, where they got it, who was responsible for that, and how that natural gas was going to be transported became extremely relevant. And it became relevant to all of your constituents, as there was a lot of concern over whether or not gas would continue to flow throughout communities across the state. And at that time, I think it's what my experience was, is that we ran into individuals that maybe did not know exactly how they procured their natural gas and some of the information that was circulating around. And so it's really important to understand that, and certainly all of you as lawmakers deal with constituent services, correct? And so you'll have constituents of yours call up and want to know, hey, this is going on with my bill, or this is what's going on in my service. And so the first question to really ask is, who do you get natural gas from? And if it's a residential customer, odds are it's probably going to be pretty easy, because there's a chance that you share the same local distribution company as your constituent does. However, that may not always be the case. For instance, if me and Representative Bourgeon, I would assume, living in the Topeka area, that he is a Kansas Gas Service customer. But if your district went outside of a larger urban area, you may have a district that also has municipal systems in it. And so again, if you're getting a question from a constituent, important to inquire into that. Also, in the larger urban areas, for instance, down the Wichita area, so Representative Depperding's area, you may have Kansas Gas Service customers, but also Black Hills customers. So again, it's at finding out, once you have that question come in, where's the next place that we need to go? Whether it's calling me, Kimberly, Stephen Cowan with Black Hills, or Sandy, Braden, Aaron Bishop with Atmos. So over in the Kansas City, Johnson County area, that could be Kansas Gas Service, or it could also be Atmos over there. And then if you get a little bit out further west, Hayes area and west, you may have Midwest Energy out there providing gas service. So then moving up to commercial and industrial, the distinction here again is for residential customers, the LDC is going to be responsible for procuring that natural gas for them. However, when you do move into the residential customers or the commercial and industrial customers, the chances are that they could be working with a third-party marketer who's procuring that natural gas, or they may be procuring it on their own, and then using the LDC's distribution system to get that gas from an interstate pipeline transported across the LDC system to their business. One distinction, some depending on location of a large industrial user, they may have an interconnect off a direct interconnect off an interstate pipeline. So they may not be using the LDC system. So with that, that's all just wellhead to burner tip 101. Move on to a little bit more information on how gas is consumed and what's kind of the makeup of customers in Kansas. So this slide here, this is just going to be a comparison of how many customers, the different customer classes, residential, commercial, industrial, within the United States and within Kansas. A couple takeaways from this is residential obviously has high customer counts. In Kansas, 880,000 residential customers. And you see their usage is going to be about 70 to 75 MCF a year. Commercial down there in Kansas have about 86,000 commercial users of natural gas. You start seeing the split out between those that are transporting natural gas and those that are sales customers. And a lot of times those sales customers are going to be smaller commercial customers. And then on the industrial side, the bar graph off to the left doesn't even pick up the industrials because it's such a small number compared to the overall customer count for residential. But the thing I want to point out is large usage, large consumption, 18,000 MCF a year on average. The other thing to point out is just then comparing that with the national average for an industrial customer being up around 44,000. That tells me there's either more industry or larger industry. That's pushing that number up. On the next page here, you have some pie charts. This is an interesting, some interesting information. This provides just total natural gas delivered to consumers. So this is actually delivered to consumers. Caveat here is natural gas that may be consumed in production or during the transportation of natural gas. The U.S. total 27.7 trillion cubic feet. So TCF, big number. You see the breakdown on residential usage. 17% of that is going to residential, 11% going to commercial, industrial, 30% large users. And then you have that significant amount of natural gas in the United States going to electric generation. And as I look back over a prior presentation that we did roughly 10 years ago, that number has obviously increased. More natural gas has been going to electric generation on a national level. However, when you get down and look at the Kansas split, industrial picks up a significant piece, but for natural gas going to electric generation, at least in Kansas, is down around 10%. And that stayed roughly the same as I looked back at some historical information. On the next slide, you see some nice little line graphs. This is not my heart rhythm right now, but anyways, you have Kansas versus the United States, and this is natural gas delivered to consumers monthly. So, what this is bringing out is that seasonal nature of natural gas consumption in the state. And that blue line there, on both, they're the same lines, but on the blue line, that's residential. And so you're seeing that winter heating load peak over the winter time and then going back down towards the summertime, low usage. So as homeowners are turning on their heating systems, more natural gas is being used there. You see a similar effect, but smaller usage on the commercial side, which is that orange kind of color, red down at the bottom. That follows a similar pattern to the residential usage. Again, this is space heating load that is occurring. The industrial users, you see a lot higher usage and a lot more consistent usage at a higher level across the year. While they are using, obviously natural gas for space heating need, but there's also a lot of use for natural gas and for feedstock, and so consistent higher level usage. You see the electric generation in Kansas have the opposite seasonal effect, higher usage during the summertime on the natural gas side, and then a little bit lower in the wintertime. On the U.S., very similar. However, I just point out, you see that from the prior slide, that yellow line for electric generation stays high and more elevated than what we see in Kansas. On the next slide, you have the natural gas consumption in Kansas on residential. And what I wanted to point out, you do have to look a little bit closer down at the bottom, and you make sure that you're comparing the years. But, overall, you're seeing a downward trend on residential consumption of natural gas over the course of the years and this chart on the left indicates from 1970 to current day. And really, I think, for the most part, that's indicating conservation on behalf of residential customers, and conservation in the terms of, I guess the other way I should say it is efficiency in the residential area. This is from, appliances becoming more efficient, building envelopes becoming tighter, insulation and such. And so overall usage for the residential customer going down. However, on the right, you see residential customers actually increasing over that time period. And that's a little bit narrower time period, 1990 to present. So with that, we'll leave just how gas is consumed and go quickly just into a little bit of a brief history on natural gas and the evolution of the industry. And really, I go to this segment just to show that, as the industry evolved, so did the need for regulation. You start off, I remember back in chemistry class when we got the Bunsen burners out around sophomore year of high school, and started messing with that. So the Bunsen burner was really expanded the applicability and the usage of natural gas. And that's actually 1855, I think in the document you have, I had a typo, 1885. So 1855, you see the first somewhat lengthy pipeline that was put in place in 1891. At this time, most of the gas in the 1800s, early 1900s, was referred to as town gas. This is manufactured gas. You had manufactured gas plants, and they were really used for street lights. And so as that was primarily used, and as you see in late 1800s, early 1900s, as cities converted over to electricity, gas producers started to try to look for other areas for new markets. But you needed to find markets that were away from the producing fields and get them to where the consumers are at. And so you saw a real need to expand pipelines across the country. And this was dependent on the quality of pipelines and how, as pipeline construction improved, this increased the ability to transport that gas over larger distances in an economical fashion. And so this is just a quick picture, snapshot of some of the pipelines across the interstate and intrastate pipelines in Kansas. And I believe the light blue shade is gas producing areas of the state. So you saw significant expansion of pipelines after World War II, and today there's 31,000 miles of pipelines and mains in Kansas. So on the next slide, you go into the history of regulation. This is by no means meant to be a comprehensive review of the regulation of the industry, but you can spend a lot of time here gleaning lessons learned, but simply, in the early days, you had local manufactured gas plants, and that gas was produced and consumed right there in that city, so you had local regulations. Cities, towns regulated that. As pipelines were developed, and that gas is now being transported across states, you see the emergence of the first state public service commissions in the early 1900s. 1911, 1928, I just want to point out that period. It's notable because you see an attempt by states to regulate interstate pipelines. And being pushed back on that, there were several Supreme Court cases that originated around that time, and those attempts to regulate states regulating interstate pipelines ran into trouble with the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution. 1938 is where interstate pipelines are first regulated under the Natural Gas Act. In 1954, you had the Phillips decision, which is another Supreme Court case, which brought around wellhead price regulation. 1954 to 1970 is a somewhat tortured history of regulating wellhead prices. But after that, from there, wellhead prices became deregulated, and pipeline services, which were transportation, sales, and storage, became unbundled. So for the local distribution, what does this mean? It means that we go out onto the market, out onto the open market, we contract for natural gas in a variety of different ways from a variety of different suppliers. We put that gas on interstate pipelines. and we procure storage and transportation of that gas to our system, to the wellhead, or sorry, to our city gate. The last slide here, this is a lot of what Nick had provided. You see the certificated areas in this map. Again, it's a lot easier to see if you go out to the KCC's website, and I think you go to the jurisdictions tab, and you can click on all the natural gas utilities that are regulated by the KCC. So this, as Nick indicated, this means that we go to the KCC for approval of any changes to our rates or terms of service. Nick talked about efficient and sufficient service that they're looking at and making sure that rates are just and reasonable. We have an obligation to serve, which generally means that we must provide service within our certificated area under reasonable terms. Other points I want to hit on is gas supply. We file a gas supply plan every single year with the KCC. And this provides information on how much gas we'll be procuring, and the details for how we're going to go about contracting for that gas, who, where that is going to be procured, what pipelines are we going to use, and what storage we're going to use. And that's a supply plan that we file we work on every year and file every year with the KCC. Regarding pipeline safety, we have regular audits of our facilities, and which primarily just focus on the proper management and maintenance of our system. We are constantly managing the integrity of our natural gas system. So with that, my last slide before I hand this over is just the natural gas utility structure in Kansas. Kansas Gas Service, Atmos Energy, and Black Hills Energy are investor-owned utilities. The municipal gas utilities you've heard from Kimberly regarding that group, Kansas Municipal Utilities. And then there's also Cooperative Natural Gas Utility, which I believe the only one in state's Midwest Energy out in the Hayes area. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to stand for questions now or wait until after Laura's done.
Let's hold questions until Ms. Lutz is finished, and we'll see what we have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Again, my name is Laura Lutz, Manager of Government Affairs at Evergy, and I am pleased to be before you today representing on behalf of all of my colleagues at the electric utilities listed on page 36. Some of what I'll cover quickly in the time that we have left may seem somewhat simplistic or repetitive. I know Nick touched on some of the things that are in my presentation, but our goal, as Kimberly stated at the beginning, is for this to be a reference document that will help kind of tie together much of what you've learned this session in your energy edification. And we're going to try to do a good job of updating this every year for the utility committees. Slide 37 is just meant to show that some of the electric generation in the state uses steam to turn a rotor. Whether it's burning coal or splitting atoms, the goal with thermal generation is to heat water to create steam to turn a generator. Some of our plants burn natural gas with no steam component, or of course, catch the wind to turn a generator. Whatever the source of power to turn that generator, the result is the same. On page 38, comparing electrical terms to the terms used for a water system is sometimes an easier way of understanding the language of electric utilities. For example, voltage compares to water pressure in terms of the pressure or the push that moves the water or electrical impulse in the system. You're likely familiar with some of the terms on page 39. Watts are power and are probably what is most important to our customers, since watts are used to heat and light their homes. For those folks who still look at their bill or get a printed copy of their bill, the second thing they probably look at after amount due is how many kilowatt hours they used for the month. An average US homeowner uses between 900 and 1,000 kilowatt hours a month. The electric grid diagrammed on page 40 shows that when watts are created at the power plant, There isn't enough pressure to push them all the way to the customer. Step-up transformers immediately outside a power plant or generating station, they raise the voltage to send the watts out onto the transmission lines. Once those watts get closer to the customer, the voltage is reduced first in substations and then by the transformers that we all see on the power poles that are closer to our home. Slide 41 is not a Jackson Pollock painting, but an actual map of Kansas showing its diverse mix of fuel sources in the power plants that are operated in the state. Coal and nuclear are baseload. Then we fill in with wind and natural gas-fired power plants where needed to meet consumer demand. Solar is still a small percentage of the mix, along with a few biomass facilities. If you turn to slide 42, you'll see as of October of last year, Kansas net electricity generation by source showed wind obviously as a major source of generation in the state. Although it appears there is no hydroelectric, the state does have one hydro facility in Lawrence, Bowersock Dam, that is 7 megawatts, I believe. Slide 43 shows where energy is consumed in Kansas, the largest consumer being the industrial sector. I know the chairman mentioned that you are going to have a presentation on rate making in Kansas, and so I think at that point you're going to dive into the weeds on the difference in the different classes of customers, industrial, residential, and commercial. Slides 44 and 45 are intended to illustrate the difference between transmission and distribution structures. The larger transmission structures are what you see mostly outside city limits, but often also in more populated urban areas, while distribution structures are smaller, usually wooden poles, and what we see in our neighborhoods. Voltages for transmission in Kansas range from about 34.5 kilovolts or 34.5 kV to 345 kV. On slide 46, that is not a picture of a coronavirus. In case you were wondering, this drawing actually illustrates the act of balancing the creation of electricity and the demand for it, which must be kept constant, sort of like keeping the water level in a lake always at the same level. If you don't do that, you risk the system collapsing. Power plants are constantly producing supply exactly when it's needed, so it's a very delicate process of balancing the load. We all don't really think about where our power comes from when we get up in the morning. We're just so used to it. I don't want to say we take it for granted, but maybe we tend to do that. Flip on the light, unplug our chargers, start up the Keurig, or turn on the TV. But in reality, the delivery of electricity is pretty darn complicated. It works pretty darn well 24/7, 365, and so we don't think about the process behind it. I remember when I first started working for Evergy, Westar at the time, about 15 years ago, I walked around for weeks telling family and friends, you have no idea what goes into the delivery of electricity. So I was pretty fascinated by it, and I'm like Nick, honestly, I learn something new every day in this industry. So slide 47 shows the different utility entities in Kansas, from investor-owned utilities, Nick covered this, or IOUs for short, to electric cooperatives, co-ops for short, municipal utilities, sometimes we shorten that to munis. I have some slides at the end that show which companies fall into which category. Slide 48 shows another map of Kansas. Nick covered this briefly, the Retail Electric Suppliers Act in Kansas. It created certified electric service territories. The map's a bit hard to read, but illustrates that there are a multitude of service territories in Kansas that the electric co-ops, munis, and IOUs all cover. The KCC can provide specific maps for your communities and districts where you would be able to see how granular the maps are, literally down to the house across the street from yours, which could be in a different service territory. I know I'm an Evergy customer in Southeast Shawnee County, but half a mile up the road, my neighbor is a Free State co-op customer. Slide 49, again, something that Nick covered, shows a list of the regulators that have oversight of the electric industry in Kansas. FERC handles transmission and wholesale rates, Nerc, reliability and cybersecurity issues. DOE is responsible for nuclear waste storage. EPA covers air, land, and water regs. The NRC oversees commercial nuclear reactor operations, so Wolf Creek in Burlington. And SPP, you heard from Lanny Nickel a few weeks ago. And then KCC on rate making and KDHE on monitoring air, land, and water regs. The next few slides, again, are just a review of the SPP. We wanted to provide these slides for future reference. Again, SPP is an RTO, Regional Transmission Organization, that provides reliable supplies of power, adequate transmission infrastructure, and the competitive wholesale electricity market. In layman's terms, I'm like Nick. I like the definition of it being the air traffic controller of the electric grid. And SPP is based in Little Rock. We all sort of had a crash course in learning more about the SPP after last February's winter weather event. I know I spent more time on the SPP website, spp.org, than I ever imagined I would. Slide 51, it's a little bit hard to see this, but we wanted to put up those three charts because it illustrates a few of the things that you can readily find on the SPP website, which I think are kind of interesting. And so this is updated, I think, every 5 minutes. And it gives you a snapshot of current pricing. The lighter colors indicate lower prices. It gives you a snapshot of the current generation mix and the forecasted electric load versus actual electric load. So last night while I was brushing up on this presentation, I got on the SPP website at 10:39, and wind was providing 64% of the energy needs in the region. Coal was providing about 22%, natural gas about 8%, and nuclear about 6%. So it's kind of a fun thing to check out. Slide 52 just represents some recent milestones in the SPP in terms of wind generation, peak load, miles of transmission lines, and marketplace savings. Slide 53 briefly describes the SPP integrated market, which launched in the spring of 2014. Might be a few people on this committee who remember when that occurred. The lowest cost source of available generation is typically used first. Participants buy and sell wholesale electricity a day ahead and in real time. And the day ahead market strives to provide the most price efficient product. It commits the most cost effective and reliable mix of generation for the region. Utilities like Evergy bid in their resources daily. And then the real-time balancing market economically dispatches that generation to balance the real-time generation and load while ensuring, of course, system reliability. This has created integrated marketplace savings of $2.14 billion on an annual basis. We haven't talked much about environmental up to this point, but regulations on air, water, and land, as you know, impact electric providers and can often be a significant driver of rate increases, which we did see from about 2005 to 2017 when federal regs required environmental retrofits to our coal plants. We're subject to a number of regulations, as you can see from the list on slide 55. Incidentally, in addition to reducing CO2 levels, utilities have also reduced sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxide emissions over the last 5 to 10 years by upwards of 90%. So the air is getting a little bit cleaner. We are entering a new cycle of growth and investment, as I'm sure you've figured out from all the various presentations you've heard. And we do have some challenges, some of which are listed on slide 56. You know, if utilities are able to make investments in infrastructure improvements, the benefits will include grid modernization to increase system reliability and efficiency, cleaner generation, and increase customer choice and control over their energy use. Then starting on slide 57, we highlight the various electric utilities in the state. First is Evergy, created in 2018 by the combination of Westar Energy and Kansas City Power and Light. The map shows our service territory in Kansas and Missouri, along with icons that show the location and type of our generation sources or generation units. We're still divided into 4 rate regions, and in Kansas, 2 of them are Evergy Kansas Metro in blue and Evergy Kansas Central, which is the light green. Those typically mirror the old Westar and KCP&L territories pre-merger in Kansas. We are one of 2 IOUs in the state, and the other is Liberty on slide 59. Liberty is represented at the State House by Whitney Dameron, and the company has about 10,000 customers in southeast Kansas. Slide 60, which looks like a Rorschach test, is actually a service territory map of the electric cooperatives in Kansas. There are 26 electric co-ops in Kansas and 3 generation and transmission co-ops, or GNTs, as you'll hear them referred to. Leslie Kaufman and Doug Shepard represent the statewide trade association for electric cooperatives, which is Kansas Electric Cooperatives. Slide 61 is Kepco, Kansas Electric Power Cooperative, which is one of the GNTs in the Kansas co-op world. They serve 16 of the 26 co-ops in the state, and they also own 6% of Wolf Creek. They serve about 200,000 rural Kansans, and Kepco is represented at the State House by Phil Wages. Slide 62 is Midwest Energy and Hayes, the only electric and natural gas co-op in Kansas, serving 100,000 customers in 40 counties. They are represented at the State House by Mike Morley and Allie Devine. Slide 63 is Sunflower Electric Power Corporation, and also in Hayes, is owned and governed by 6 distribution co-ops, plus a not-for-profit electric utility owned entirely by a co-op. They own and operate the Holcomb coal-fired generation station out near Garden City. And Sunflower is represented at the State House by Claire Guston and James Burnkart. On slide 64, we move from the rural electric co-ops to the municipals. A municipal utility is owned by the city it serves. There are 118 public power and 51 municipal gas utilities in Kansas. Whereas a co-op is typically governed by a board of directors, decision-making at a municipal rests with locally elected officials. Kimberly Genscher-Swati represents the Kansas Municipal Utilities in Kansas. Then there's also the Kansas Municipal Energy Agency on slide 65, whose members operate 130 generating units, manage multiple power supply projects, and provide planning, regulatory, and other member services. Kimberly also represents KMEA at the Capitol. Slide 66 shows the Kansas Power Pool, established in 2004 by 6 Kansas municipalities. They now number 24 members who pool their resources to preserve and invest in their members' energy facilities for collective future energy and transmission needs. And Kimberly also represents KPP. Slide 67 is the Kansas City Board of Public Utilities, which serves 65,000 electric customers in Wyandotte County. They also have more than 50,000 water customers, and BPU is represented by David Melhoff and Kimberly Swati. And last but not least, among Kansas utilities, on slide 68 is ITC Great Plains, an owner-operator of high-voltage transmission systems in parts of Kansas and Oklahoma, and I think other states throughout the country, and regulated by FERC. As illustrated on page 69, they're sort of the middleman between generation sources and distribution to the end electric user. ITC is represented at the State House by J.R. Bean, and I believe you have a presentation from ITC coming up from Brett Leopold. So, and finally, the next to last slide is simply meant to illustrate that the stable, quiet days of the energy and utility industry are probably a thing of the past. With the transition to cleaner sources of energy, new technologies, and customer demand for innovative products and services at affordable prices, we can all be assured of constant change in the industry for years to come. We appreciate the opportunity to share this journey with you and appreciate the role you play in creating good energy policy. We know it is certainly not easy. That said, I want to mention again the excellent resource you have in your Kansas utility lobbyists. We all work well together. We're ready to share information, and you can reach out to any one of us. If we don't know the answer, we have colleagues back at our companies that can find the answer for you. So thank you again for your service. Best of luck during the remainder of this session, and we look forward to working with you all in the months to come. And we'll stand for questions.
Thank you very much, Laura. Questions? Representative Bergquist.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And since you're still at the mic, the areas on maps or page 60, the service territory of electric co-ops, are all the non-colored areas simply the areas that are served by owner utilities and municipalities?
Hang on, I'm on.
Just
The white?
The white areas.
I might defer, if, with the chair's permission, defer to the
My
electric.
question just to anybody.
Okay.
So that'd be great.
Leslie Kaufman, Kansas Electric Cooperatives, and yes, the white area on the map you're referring to, Representative, would be a combination of municipal or investor-owned utility service area.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Other questions? Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Leslie, you may not have wanted to sit down quite this quick. Just a general question. I think, Laura, you mentioned Kepco owns 6% of Wolf Creek. Is that okay? What does that really mean? Other than, yeah, I know you own the 6%. Do you get 6% of the power out of it? Or are you getting power at a discounted rate? What's that really mean?
That's fine.
Mr. Chairman, I was, with your permission, could we defer to Phil Wages?
I figured you'd want Phil to answer that. Phil Wages from Kepco.
Mr. Chairman, Phil Wages from Kepco. Our 6% ownership equates to approximately 70 megawatts of capacity.
So you're guaranteed that much out of it?
Yes, sir. We own 70 megawatts of Wolf Creek.
What happens, can you pull in excess at times, or are you a hard stop at 70 megawatt, or?
Wolf Creek, except during outage times, will be running flat out. It will be running at full capacity. So we will get anywhere from, generally about a third of our power will come from Wolf Creek.
Okay, thank you.
And that's a great question, and that's common across utilities that groups will contract for a certain amount of power, whether it's from, for example, in municipal world, GRDA, the Grand River Dam Authority, will provide a certain amount of power and through these agreements, and so we'll see that come up time and again. So good question. Thank you, Representative Delperdang. Other questions? Anybody have their hand up online? It may be a first. I want to thank Kimberly and Patrick and Laura and everyone who spent a lot of time putting this together. This is not just one or two people. This is everybody across these industries working together to give you a resource that I hope will be helpful, not just today, but throughout the rest of this session and beyond. And certainly appreciate the commitment to not only doing it this time, but maybe keeping this up to date, and in future years, this can be done a little earlier on in a session so everybody can have that information. We will on Thursday have two presentations, one from Evergy and one from Liberty. I note slide 58 in this packet is about Evergy's integrated resource plan. And we're going to be talking about or hearing from them about that, as well as hearing from Liberty on their strategic plan. One of the things that along with the vice chair and ranking member, that we're trying to put together for you later this session is kind of how you build a power plant of any kind, and the immense amount of planning that goes into deciding to create a generating facility, whether that is a coal plant, a nuclear plant, a wind farm, and maybe giving you kind of an overview of how that is different for each different type of generating source. But these decisions are not made in a vacuum, and they're not made with the idea that we're going to go out and break ground next year. It is an immense undertaking, and you've seen it just hinted at, the regulatory environment that's in play when it comes to energy and energy generation. So it's going to be great to have these two IOUs here in the state give us kind of an overview of where they're going and where they see the market taking their companies as they look to the future. We talk a lot about being market-driven and letting free market principles kind of decide things. And so they're going to give you their view of the market and where those things are going at this time. So look forward to hearing from them on that. We will have a little bit of time at the end of Thursday's session for committee discussion. And that's an opportunity for you to weigh in both on what's happened so far this session, as well as topics that you may want more information on in the latter half of the session, so we can make sure that we're being responsive. As Nick said and Laura reiterated, the more you know about this, the more questions come up. So if there's an area that you want to know more about, happy to cover those and try to get somebody in to talk about those in the second half of the session. So if there's nothing else for the good of the order, we'll give you guys 10 minutes free here to go run around through the State House. So thank you again to our presenters. Thank you, Nick. Really appreciate all the time and effort put in. We are adjourned.